everyone. My name is Nicole Gonzalez Van Cleave, and I'm an associate professor at Brown University in the Department of Sociology. But I'm also a faculty fellow here at the Center for the Study of Race, the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, as well as the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. And we are so excited today to have an amazing all-star panel to bring together kind of two worlds. So I study mass incarceration and look at the social science aspects of mass incarceration. How do we study it? How do we quantify it? How do we capture the lived experience of incarceration in America? And how do we talk about its links to enslavement in the Americas and this particularly unique system of oppression? And today we are going to bring in the artist perspective from three wonderful luminaries in the field that are going to show how art can be a resistance to mass incarceration, a response to mass incarceration, and truly an inspiration for those who are incarcerated, but those who are outside the boundaries of prisons in America, and helping us all think about incarceration in new ways. So I want to thank all the panelists for coming. I want to thank the staff at the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. And I want to turn it over to an exceptional undergraduate at Brown University. One of the wonderful things about being at Brown is you meet such not just ambitious undergraduate students, but you meet truly inspired students that come with you with so much energy and talent. And I always say, as a professor, I just try to say yes as much as possible. And I'm so glad I did. So Justin Lee had this wonderful idea to create this panel today. It was through his perseverance and his know-how that he envisioned that this panel could be possible, and he made it happen. And so I want to hand it over to him. Justin is truly the perfect person for this panel because he's both a Brown University student, but also a RISD student, coming as a scholar of mass incarceration, working on the archive that we created this summer on the Mass Incarceration Lab, and creating and in some ways archiving the narratives of those impacted by incarceration and preserving them in the John Hay Library forever so that generations will have those narratives to come and it can be studied and preserved. But Justin's also an artist. So thank you, Justin, for making this happen today. And I will turn the floor over to you to do the introductions of our panelists.
Awesome. Thank you, Professor Van Cleave, for that awesome introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I am so excited to be introducing these three amazing artists. I actually worked with them over the summer as part of my class, Soc 1116, which was on criminal justice in America, with a focus on mass incarceration. And today we'll be starting off with Ricardo Cortés. He's an amazing artist who I had the pleasure of interviewing over the summer. In particular, he had this series of portraits he did at Rikers Island that I was incredibly inspired by. Ricardo, if you'd like, I'd love to see, you can share your screen and just give a brief introduction about your work.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here. I see myself as primarily as an artist, and so I'm a little humbled to be amongst scholars and activists who are doing really really strong work on mass incarceration. I think as an artist, I do believe that we are a force of potential resistance, as you said, and a response to art, and also as a bearing witness and sharing our own experiences and relationships to incarceration. I actually started as an illustrator, and I got into social justice primarily through the drug war, and that was my first entry into the idea of dealing with criminal justice system, was through the drug war. And specifically, I did a children's book when my first book, because I am a picture book artist, was a children's book about marijuana. I'm just going to show here, because this is what kind of got me started in the realm of illustrating books and telling stories. A little bit after that time, I also did a book that was very popular called Go the Fuck to Sleep. And I saw that on the introduction of my title, it was known as the illustrator of this book because this was a very popular book. But as I said, my work was also centered around activism and speaking truth to power, that kind of thing. around that time that this book, Go the Fuck to Sleep, came out, I was offered the opportunity to work at Rikers Island. I met someone who was doing work there, and they were basically just looking for some people to do some art workshops. And so in 2012, I started working at Rikers Island, and I was in New York City. It's a detention complex of jails in New York City. And I was there for about 3 years until I moved on to another jail system in Manhattan. But while I was there, it was originally designed as a series of artist workshops. I was there volunteering time and bringing materials that, as we're probably going to be getting into contraband materials, but contraband materials such as pencils and papers and books, things like that, that I was bringing to give some time for detainees there to do some drawing, to do some reflection, to draw, to even write letters, basically whatever anyone wanted to do. And while I was there, I'm going to pull this up because I basically started getting requests to do portraits and drawing people while I was there, because I'm an artist. People saw me draw, and I was drawing alongside people. And so I started doing, let's see here, I'm going to try to share my screen here. I started doing a series of these portraits. And basically every time I entered the facilities, I started creating a schedule with people, and we basically just started sitting down. And every time I was there, I would sit and with one individual and draw them. And it was a really intimate experience for myself and potentially for them, because they're basically being stared at for 45 minutes. And I'm taking these little golf pencils, this is what we were using, and I was just drawing people and sometimes talking, sometimes listening to their stories, and really just creating these portraits as a means of just showing people's lives at this jail complex. At the end of the sessions, I would give the subject the portrait. They actually own all the original portraits themselves, and I asked for permission, as the piece that you're seeing here today. I asked for permission that I would be able to show them on my website, etc. So these were Xerox copies that I made. And I basically, almost everybody, in fact, I think there are only a couple people out of dozens of people that elected to participate in this and share their image. But yeah, it was a really profound experience as someone who, again, I'm not an activist or a scholar in mass incarceration and incarceration, but as someone that I felt that could be here to bear witness. And that's kind of what I felt this was all about. I mean, just something about these portraits for me, there's, not to be cliche, but the humanity in just every single person that I met was something that was really profound. And yeah, that took a couple of years of these are some of the portraits I did, not all of them, but this was the body of work that came into Rikers, and I'm going to be talking about it the rest of the session and answer any questions. But I also actually, after this series of portraits, moved over to the Manhattan Detention Complex in New York City, and was working in a transgender housing unit, where I also met the Legal Aid Society that was doing a lawsuit on behalf of several transgender women who had been arrested for prostitution charges because of a New York law, New York Penal Code 240.37, which eventually became known as the Walking While Trans ban. And basically, I was given NYPD arrest affidavits that were used in arresting women that were considered engaging in prostitution. But the arrest affidavits that the NYPD uses were really just some of the indicia that NYPD was allowed to indicate to probable cause to arrest women was based on things like their clothing. As you can see here, this was the actual arrest affidavit. The woman was dressed in pink and black sweater, tight black pants, tight jeans, and tight tank top showing cleavage. And also another indication of arrest is potentially that a woman was talking to several men on the street. And so this woman said, I was only speaking to that one man, but the NYPD said she talked to 3 women in an hour. And so I'm also showing this because obviously it relates to incarceration, but it also captured another part of my work in that I started getting documents and repositioning these documents by illustrating them myself.
Ricardo,
In a
really
way,
sorry to cut you off right now, but
yeah.
on the screen we only see the portraits. Would you mind resharing your screen
Oh,
with
yes.
new documents, please?
Thank you. Let's see here.
Of course.
Let's see here if I share
We
this
can see your
project.
mouse and everything, so.
Okay. How's this?
Beautiful.
Do you,
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, this is the these are the arrest affidavits that I was just talking about. Basically, when the NYPD would arrest somebody, they got a sheet that was pre-printed out, and they could check off a series of boxes to say, I saw a woman and she was wearing, she was standing in a public place for X amount of time. She would stop a male passerby, and I saw this woman dressed in provocative or revealing clothing. And here you see checkbox of this person was wearing tight jeans showing cleavage. And so, yeah, so basically this type of work, I became interested in recreating historical documents, these more recent documents, but recreating documents in illustration as a means of just kind of repositioning something that I've seen before, and showing it in a new way. So for example, in the follow-up to the children's book about marijuana, I did a history of the coffee, coca, and Coca-Cola company. And I found a series of documents that basically detailed the relationship between the Coca-Cola company and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in the U.S. National Archives. And I went through all these different documents and to show some of the relationships between, in this case, the Coca-Cola company and the Federal Government Bureau of Narcotics. Maybe I can just show some here, but this is all illustrations of actual documents that I found. And it was just a interesting way for me to basically tell a story using historical documents, but doing them in a new way, and showing them through illustration. So I've done other work about around incarceration and around social justice and criminal justice specifically. I did a handbook about jury nullification, which is a process that defense attorneys are not allowed to tell you in a courtroom, but it is a legal process that juries are allowed to acquit a defendant regardless of the evidence that is presented to them, because they don't believe that the law is just. So for example, in the case that I was illustrating, for drug war cases, if someone is arrested for selling marijuana, they have 14 pounds of cocaine and it's all on videotape and it's a rap, we know they're guilty. If you're on a jury and you don't believe that people should be incarcerated for that type of crime, you can vote not guilty, and that's called jury nullification. So I did a primer for that, for doing that kind of work. I'll cut myself off right now because I know we have other artists, but that's a brief overview of my work. And yeah, I'm really excited to jump into more conversations here.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. That was an amazing introduction. I loved hearing about your illustrations of the documents. So cool to me. Also a really good way to highlight that issue. But thank you so much. Sherrill, let's talk about your work a little bit. I also got to speak with Sherrill over the summer about his work, particularly focusing on the Jumpsuit Project. In 2013, Sherrill was falsely accused of 4 felonies, and in protest of that, for his graduate thesis, he wore an orange jumpsuit to campus every single day. And for me, it was just so powerful, the act of incorporating something so blatantly visual and so it's so in your face, that orange jumpsuit, and bringing that into academic spheres. I loved it so much, but I'm going to share my screen right now on some other work that I really appreciated. Give me 1 second. Awesome. Can you guys see everything? Yeah. Awesome. So this was one of the pieces that really stood out to me. That was created in 2018. So just based on the description, it was in prison where everyone is dehumanized, everyone wears the same clothing, where everyone is told to do the same things, the same routines. One way that people can leave their mark is by literally engraving their name or a saying or a phrase onto like a wall or beneath furniture. And what Sherrill asked people to do at this gallery was take one of the tools and write an answer to a question. And so the question posed in this image was, would you save the life of someone who is innocent? Just looking at all of the markings and how they form a cohesive image was really interesting to me. And then you can focus on the specific responses people have. A lot of yeses, a lot of course, things like that. But of course, every now and then there's a no too. And so it's just really interesting to see how people interpreted that, even as a response, if it was considered a joke, what they mean by that, how they interpret saving the life of someone's innocent, what innocence even means in this context was just super insightful to me. Another piece series I really liked was his series on contraband. And so Ricardo touched this earlier, but contraband is such like a controversial and clear aspect of mass incarceration that's discussed a lot in popular media. And by framing literal items that would be considered contraband, like this paperclip, for example, it brings into question what it does it mean when we bring mass incarceration into the art world, what it means to frame something like that and make it a piece of fine art. I really loved it. I just thought it was such an interesting way to present this issue. But Sherrill, if you'd like to talk more about your work, you can share your screen if you'd like, or you can just discuss whatever works best.
Yeah, if you could keep that up, I'll talk a little more. Can you go back to the after the wake up piece? I'll elaborate a little more on that.
For sure.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing this up. Even though this was shown after graduation, I did this project once before when I was in grad school, when I was wearing the orange jumpsuit. When I got wrongfully incarcerated, it was in between my first and second year in grad school. That's what made it, I guess that's what connected the dots for me to return to grad school for studio art and kind of do this performance project as kind of a response to everything that was kind of happening in my world. I make a lot of things now. I make a lot of objects and things of that nature. That's how I started. So I never was a performance artist by any means, but the experience had jolted my reality, my perspective on life and society in such a way that what needed to be worked on was me. And the only way that that could happen was if my body was present and out in the world facing some of the conflicts that I was kind of doing internally. So it forced me to kind of get out there and kind of address some of the things that I wanted to do, and then also get like an honest perspective of some of the questions I was kind of exploring as far as the reactions or how society perceives me with the stigmas and prejudice that exist around incarceration. So say all that, I didn't want to make anything when I came back to do this, and I was just kind of left with the performance project. So this was a participatory artwork that also came out of that closeness. Like I had got exonerated in 2015, and then 8 months later went back to grad school wearing an orange jumpsuit. So I was still very like tight. I was still very close to the experience, way closer than I am to it now. But so the idea for this was a job that I had while I was incarcerated of entering into vacant cells and repainting them. And then and seeing how individuals live within that space. We were not allowed to enter into each other's cells. So it was kind of a privileged opportunity for me to get access to other people's spaces in that way. And in doing so, I just seen how, people spend their time in these 2-man cells. These are like 23-hour lock-in times, and, how you fidget and interact with that space for, extended days and years and stuff like that. It left the mark on me in ways that I kind of wanted to recreate this. And at the image that you showed, it only has one question, but 10 will be introduced. But right before another question is introduced, that wall would get repainted gray. And so it will continue to happen with every new question. That wall will get repainted. And that was my job, to go in each vacant cell, repaint it. And even though you repaint it, those words and that presence of an individual still remains. And that's what I kind of was trying to recreate in that space and through this work. And the next question is like, would you save someone's life who is not innocent? And then the third question is, are you innocent? So for people to kind of get back to come back to the work. And I was really thrilled to have that much action on one question. And there's 10 questions in total. It was just kind of like, at the end of the show, the wall was really beat up. It was beautiful. To have that type of energy and response from a community was really amazing. And the next one that you had highlighted, the contraband work, the image, that razor blade is smaller than a razor blade and a pencil sharpener. It's really small. I found it in the crack of my bunk in one of my cells, and the razor blade was so dull. But these objects, there's 3 in this series. It's a triptych. They're so small, but they had so much weight. If I was to get caught in some blocks or housing units with these items, it would have been consequences, infractions. I could have lost my responsibilities, job, or get relocated to another housing unit or placed in isolation. And the one that has the most color is that large paper clip with cinnamon floss. And it was so important to me to kind of highlight that, because we were not even allowed floss in there. And so I had inherited this floss from a guy who got sentenced to life. He told me where it was. I found it. And when I found it, it was so great, like the smell of it, right? Like I had been, I've been without for so long in an intense way. And to cherish it in a way that it's not replenished, like it will never get replenished. This is all I have. Do I share it with my comrades? Like, it's never coming back, and being very protective over these things. And so trying to connect to an audience, again, you mentioned it earlier, of like me placing this type of work into a museum or gallery art context space, is trying to open up a way to have conversations about a place no one is really allowed to kind of get into unless you get in there, like, for any other reason. So trying to pinpoint these things that we see out in this world, but kind of elevate it to the level that it was for me. Like these were really heavy. These are very small, simple objects. They just are themselves, but they're really, really important, really, really heavy. And trying to bring that to light of like, it's just that, and have people kind of connect that bridge to this space without, being there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. That was a lot. Wow. With the wall painting it over, I'm sure at the end it looked really crazy, right?
Yeah, I kept them. I had them cut the wall up, and it was too good. And you'll be surprised by this action. Like, those are very heavy, intense questions, but I'm giving you a very, it's tough to carve into the wall,
Yeah.
Deep answers, responses to these philosophical questions in ways, like, and so you got to really give the wall some power to kind of get into it, and you have to be thoughtful. And then some of the reactions are pictorial and images, so like even those responses matter too, because there are insecurities around giving in those ways, and how we communicate our emotions and feelings around these issues can look a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's best verbal, sometimes it's better written, but sometimes it's also pictorial. And that was something that I learned in that work, that I was like, why am I getting like trees and like these things? But then I had to realize, like, we're all are facing this situation in many different ways, and we all have to find a good way for ourselves to kind of have an outlet for it. And whether that be, it can be in many different forms.
For sure. Thank you, Sherrill. Awesome. So next up we have Jackie. Jackie is known as the founder of Solitary Gardens, which is a really cool project I got to learn about over the summer, where each person gardening essentially has a plot of land that is the same size as most prison cells in the US. Jackie has also worked with Herman Wallace and other notoriously previously incarcerated individuals. Jackie, would you like to give an introduction to your work?
Sure. Thank you so much. I also want to uplift what Nicole said in the very beginning, and just what a pleasure it was to work with you this summer, Justin. how your energy is so delightful. And also what an honor it is for me to hold space with both Ricardo and Sherrill. Sherrill and I met each other, I don't know, a zillion years ago. And there's something about that, the way that you work that really just hits me in the ticker every time. So it's like really just such incredible progress in the way that things are shaping and turning out for you. So I'm so happy for you. Thank you for bringing in Herman. For me, it's where I start every one of my presentations. Herman Wallace, as Justin said, was my elder. And I sort of used the framework of, I've been playing air guitar with issues of mass incarceration and solitary confinement for about 20 years. I had the incredible pleasure of meeting Robert King, the gentleman who's in the center, shortly after he was released after 29 years of solitary confinement and wrongful conviction here in the state of Louisiana at a prison called Angola. And King, this is the only picture of the three of them together, collectively known as the Angola Three. Herman on King's right and Woodfox, Albert Woodfox on his left. And for all intents and purposes, these are my political fathers and elders, and without whom I would not have the great opportunities like this one to be able to share this work, or to commit myself for the last 20 years, excuse me, suddenly there goes my voice. But all of my personal and political orientation is because of these men, their great tutelage and their patience and their love. And so I want to make sure I center the conversation around that. To the right on this slide are some of the letters that I shared with Herman over the course of the 12 years that we collaborated on a project called The House That Herman Built, where I asked him what kind of house does a man who has spent, initially I met him at 29 years, 30, 35, 40, 41 years in isolation dream of. And much of that correspondence was documented through the extensive but all forgotten language of letter writing. But that obviously grew into phone calls, visits to the prison. And, I live in Louisiana because of Herman Wallace. This is an image of his home as it was designed in all of those different faculties. And I've spent the last 21 years trying to build the dream home of a Black Panther and political prisoner who spent 41 years in isolation in the state of Louisiana. And to that point, the way that Herman and I sort of dreamed about how to represent this complex story, together we created an exhibition called The House That Herman Built, which juxtaposed the reality of his confinement, that 6 foot by 9 foot cell in which he spent a minimum of 23 hours a day, to his superpower, to his ability to transcend prison walls and constructs, ignorance and racism through his imagination. And so you can see some of the CAD videos and the model that I had built and some blueprints around the edge. And so that 6 foot by 9 foot cell was so emotional to build, because I entered the space that my beloveds were forced to endure, this impossible space. I got closer to Woodfox and to Herman and to King and to the 100,000 men, women, and children that are forced to endure the cruel and unusual punishment of solitary confinement, right? And so each time I rebuilt Herman's cell, I recognized it as arguably one of the most important targets as an abolitionist, as a PIC abolitionist. And I often ask folks to really think about Angela Davis's framework for this, when she talks about prisons as solitary confinement within our society, they're generally not in the centers of our city. She asked us to think about prisons as solitary within our existence or within our society. And then within those prisons, we have isolation cells, which embody arguably the most concentrated form of punishment and white supremacy. And therefore, for me, the last 20 years have been dedicated to abolishing them. So as many of you know, Herman Wallace's conviction was overturned on October 1st, 2013, and he joined the ancestors on October 4th, 2013, after 3 days of physical freedom. And so, there I was living in the state of Louisiana, as we call it, in immense grief and completely disoriented by the reality that I lived here because of him, right? But then I had thousands and thousands of letters that I started to look at with grieving and confounded eyes. And I started to realize how much this man, who was kept in concrete and steel for 41 years against his will, talked about gardens and flowers and the woods, and how much, in fact, when I asked him, what kind of house does a man who's lived in a 6 foot by 9 foot cell dream of? The first thing he said was, I can clearly see the gardens, and they will be full of gloxinias, delphiniums, and roses. And I wish for guests to be able to smile and walk through gardens all year round. So I knew there was some way to uphold the life and legacy of my elder through gardens, but I didn't know what it was, you know? Like Sherrill was saying, I'm a maker, like I make objects, right? I was never a gardener. So I had no idea what it was. But you know, you receive downloads from the ancestors and beyond. And at a certain point, I realized that I could take one of those 6 by 9 cells, cut it down, and transform it into a garden bed. And so the Solitary Gardens does just that. I'm sorry for the shape of my screen. I don't know what's happening here. But they're principled on the tenets of abolition and permaculture as a means to facilitate unexpected exchanges between folks who are still in isolation and volunteers like ourselves on the outside. So each one of these prison cells turned garden beds maintains that blueprint, the 6 by 9. And you can see the only place the human being can grow is where they can actually physically move inside the isolation cell. So you can see the toilet sink, the bed, the desk, and the chair. And just while we're here on this image, the garden beds themselves are made out of sugarcane, cotton, tobacco that I grow here in Louisiana and then mill down. And then we mix in this collective rammed earth process to illustrate the evolution of chattel slavery into mass incarceration, right? Those are the largest chattel crops. And so we're building these prison cells out of them. But what's been so beautiful is like through the, again, to call in that social practice, lost art of letter writing, is inviting other folks, oftentimes like Gen Zs and Gen Xs, no wait, not Gen Zs and Gen Ys and millennials and like all those folks who have maybe never written a letter in their life, you know, like to actually ask that we are sharing in this process, which is so beautiful and transformative in so many ways. Because, you know, you're really like, you can't delete, erase, fix, blah, blah, blah. Like the commitment to what you are saying is so much important when it's embodied in ink. I bet Ricardo knows that too as an illustrator, right? So in this way, we're translating folks who are still incarcerated, their visions, their dreams, oftentimes becomes portraits of those who are kept in isolation cells into the ground by planting the vegetables and herbs of their choosing. I'm going to jump ahead here because for the sake of time. But you can imagine that I end up with a lot of plant matter, you know, 20 years deep, about 6 years into solitary gardens. And so, you know, some of that is shared with the families of folks who are incarcerated, this what we call solitary gardeners. Some of it is shared with our immediate neighbors, but there still is just, you know, the earth gives, you know. And so I started playing with plant medicine in 2018. And now I have this entire apothecary that's built out of plant medicine, grown and designed by folks who are still inside, right? And for me, this is just such a beautiful way because incarcerated individuals get to design these medicinal garden beds. And in that way, they have this too often unique opportunity to heal the communities that they're often accused of harming, right? So really trying to push against the ideas of value inside our carceral institutions and what we can offer back out. So this project is called the Prisoner's Apothecary. And so this project is traveling in spring of 2020, where we are holding these public facing workshops at the intersection of abolition, healthcare sovereignty, and plant medicine, and really listening to the different ways that plants teach us about abolition or plants teach us to be better people. Yeah. So thinking about the plant ancestors as much as the ancestors. And so this project has grown a bit here in New Orleans, where I'm working with Robert Jones and Jerome Morgan, two men who also spent 20 years in Angola for crimes they couldn't have possibly committed. We're seeing a trend here, huh? And we're opening a cafe together, holistic abolitionist-centered cafe and diversion program with the first ever progressive DA in the state of Louisiana. And so the idea is that we will model the sanctuary, the back of this building, after Solitary Gardens. But instead of volunteers who are just maybe interested or abolition curious, it'll be run by folks who Jason Williams, our DA, is tapping for an alternative to incarceration. So there's an educational component, and then they are growing the food in collaboration with folks who are still inside. And so it's really asking us to think about abolition as a practice and a philosophy and a lifestyle, not so much as a destination that you achieve. And, you know, this work has really been exacerbated or catalyzed. We just had a really intense Category 4 Hurricane Ida down here. And so the space got activated before it was ready. And this beautiful thing happened where people were like, this is dope. What's going on here? And we were able to like offer plant medicine, teas, tinctures, salves to folks who didn't even have power. You know, some parts of Louisiana still don't have power. And then also be able to get folks who had access and power to bring us things that other folks didn't, right? So really principling it on the notions of mutual aid, which for me is like one of the core tenets of abolition itself. So this project is called Ngumbo, Cafe and Sanctuary. And Ngumbo is the Bantu word for okra. And so it is named after actually Professor Juri Augusto, who is at Brown University, was the one who shared this story so eloquent with me. I'm so grateful. And it's the story of how okra made its way over to the colonized United States, braided into the hair of the enslaved body as they were forced to survive the treacherous Middle Passage, and then planted into colonized soil. And then there's these big, beautiful yellow flowers that reminded other enslaved folks of homeland, of hope, of survival, and of possibility. And so we're taking that and having this cafe and diversion program that is led by formerly incarcerated folks, centers the lives of currently incarcerated folks, become that beacon of hope, of possibility, of survival, and of another world. That's it. Yeah, y'all, if y'all have questions, this is like a little bit of an auctioneer version of my presentation. Y'all have questions, you could just hit me up. There's my contact info.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Jackie. That was really cool. I had no idea you were creating an apothecary. That's like actually so interesting. Professor Van Cleave, would you like to jump in here and then ask artists some questions?
I do. I mean, I have so many questions. You know, I'll go in the order. I think for Ricardo, one of the things that I've written about is like the mugshot as a symbol. So in my research, prosecutors would take mugshots and they build wallpaper murals out of all the people they convicted as though they were like heads on stakes. And one of the things I've written about is the mugshot is a type of pose. To submit to it is to internalize the protocols of discipline. It's to agree to act as though you're already a corpse. And there's something really powerful about what you're doing with the portraits, because the whole system is moving you, and these files take on different life to abuse you in different ways about controlling the truth and controlling what we know. Can you comment a little bit about the resistance of the portraits that you're doing, but also I mean, to me, the mundane files, I mean, people take for granted the power that those things have. But prosecutors use them as artifacts all the time. So I see this link between your work and my work. So if you can talk about that.
Wow, that's really deep. I mean, frankly, I actually never even made the connection between mugshots and portraits that I was making. Partly because obviously I was interacting with people as people, and I was the impetus of doing these portraits was more based on what they were like. I want a portrait of myself. I want something to look good that I can send back to my mom or my daughters or something like that. And so it was more of a relationship experience of drawing these people. I worked at Rikers. I was at Rosie's, which is a women's jail, and I was also at RNDC, which is young men. So there are like 19 to 21. And yeah, I mean, again, it was really about just these relationships with people. I remember the one thing that I actually felt a little bit of conflict of is, when you're incarcerated for a long time, you obviously don't get to care for yourself in the same ways that you would have on the outside. And so there was always the balance of, how do I want to really show you exactly as you are? Maybe your hair's grown in funky ways, or you haven't been able to put yourself in the way that I know that I've seen pictures of you on the outside you show me, and that this is not how you see yourself. But at the same time, I wanted to be honest and about where we are in the moment. So yeah, there was just really just sitting down with people and having conversations and just drawing, and then just being happy to give something to somebody they could bring and pass on to however they wanted to share it. So the resistance I felt in it to the greater powers at B were just really just more about giving some and sharing some small piece of joy in a situation and an environment that does not really foster that type of behavior. I mean, really, I felt that one of the biggest obstacles to the work that I was doing was really the corrections officers, who were making it so difficult to have these simple workshops that would ostensibly good for everybody involved in incarceration, meaning that when people are getting to do something that is joyful, or not, I don't even want to say joyful, but if I want to write a letter home to my daughter, I want to use the colored pencils that we have. That should be something that should be encouraged, because in the absence of that, then the corrections officers are dealing with their so-called discipline issues and things like that. So yeah, I think that was a little off topic from what you're asking, but
No.
really, yeah, I mean, I just saw these portraits as just an interaction with people and creating something that we could share in that space.
Yeah. Well, it's in some ways is the anti-mugshot, because it's the opposite of what the system is doing to you. It's allowing, it's humanizing. It's seeing the joy and the beauty in people, even if at their worst moment. And there's something really powerful about that. Thank you. And then Sherrill, I was, I'm just, given that the system has wronged you, and I'm doing a new book now on the wrongful conviction of children, and there's a lot of them. It's astounding, but I'm astounded by how many innocent people are behind bars that we're just not talking about. And so one of the things I've suggested is mass wrongful conviction, which is that the system gets it wrong a lot more than it's getting it right. And we're just assuming that it's getting it right. Given what you've survived, that prison jumper is such a stigmatizing color. I would imagine that once you were free, this would be, how did you shed the stigma piece of it in your, because this is such a personal journey. And then how did you repurpose it? Because did you find that triggering as you walked in and around? Because I know so many people of color try to shed the stigma. Like, I have a cousin that's formerly incarcerated. I don't like people, it's hard when people assume things about you. And how did you balance those kind of personal dynamics with this active resistance?
Yeah, I want to make it sound like that I had it all figured out in the beginning, but I didn't arrive to any of the conclusions that I got towards the end of my thesis. For me, it was very simple. It was really just for me. I was really having trouble getting back out into the world after this experience. And returning to school was my last straw that was suggested to me. Like, all right, you're having trouble everywhere else, job interviews, this, that, and the fourth, discussing breaks in employment history and trying to cover up and all of these little things that end up. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. I'm just checking on my internet. Yes. those little things end up adding up so much to me that like returning back to school, thinking about the space again, I had different reactions to the space. Like this doesn't feel the same. This experience, this burden that I'm carrying is really closing me off in every space that I'm kind of like entering into now. And so I kind of wanted to flip that. And so like the jumpsuit I was wearing wasn't a jumpsuit or a costume. It was really just an orange coverall. Like I just bought it off Amazon. And so the funny thing I tried to get was for other people to have an honest outward expression, because plain clothes, you can't read trauma in general on anybody, you know? And so I wanted to infect the small controlled community of a college campus in that way, to where I could get that out first without it being hidden. And so, and then from there, we can then discuss how we got this read wrong. And then why are we reading it like this immediately, you know? And then there was the personal battle that you were saying, like how it was very triggering for me to wear that every day. I didn't want to wear it every day. And the reactions in the beginning, first couple of months, were also triggering in the sense of like people being afraid of me, and choosing to react in those unflattering ways to me were triggering to me being in the court and trial again. Like, how can you say these things about me? You know, like I am not that. You don't have to fear me, you know? And those type of interactions were triggering every day until I had to kind of understand that it absolutely wasn't about me. It absolutely wasn't about me in the trial. It was about like stigmas or statistics that were already placed. I had to do multiple fights before we actually got to the trial. And so recognizing that was something I was able to kind of separate myself and protect myself. Like it isn't me that they're scared of. It's about this jumpsuit when it's placed on a body like mine specifically. And so yeah, we're trying to work that out. That was first couple of months were really crazy. And still that project, I don't do it as often or frequent as now, especially not during COVID. But it was when I had a break between the performances, I realized how therapeutic it became for me. This like community engagement, talking about it, feeling safe because I'm discussing it with my community, right? Like my community is working with me to unearth and peel back this burden, right? Like, you know, like now, now I can just be me, you know, we're shouldering this burden together, we're working on it together. And I know that this type of experience is something that it's not something that I'll just get over or put behind me. It's something that I'll continue to kind of like have to work on throughout engaging in the community to make it safe for me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And so for Jackie, I feel like I know so much about your work. I had taught your documentary, as well as we got to have your exhibit, Herman's House, be at Brown University. So we were very lucky. And I think one of the things that I wanted to know on a very personal level was how you were able to also protect your brain in terms of, the trauma that it means to kind of be the person that was helping Herman. And, again, I felt like this was that you had positioned yourself as kind of equals, like you were out and he was in, and that it didn't matter. You're all human, you're both human beings, but yet that must've been really hard to feel like you were on the outside and you just couldn't access him. I know when I go into prisons to do research or interview people, there are times when I feel like I have nightmares because you feel stuck, like the person that you love is stuck in there and you can't get them out. How did you balance that in terms of feeling empowered and being persistent and continue to do the work that you do? And because it is incomprehensible what Herman went through. It is, that's what the students had talked about. Incomprehensible. They sat in the cell, they tried to imagine, and it was incomprehensible. There was almost like no words. So how did you manage those emotions?
You're assuming I managed them or that I found them, you know?
Right.
And, you know, I think had it not been Herman, had it been, I don't know, you know, most anyone else, that I wouldn't have the framework. Like when I talk about him as my elder, you know, and I say that my personal and political orientation is because of his great tutelage, his patience, and his love. And those three things are like, you know, the strongest object in the universe is a triangle, right? And the way that those things were able to hold me up to also continue this work for 20 years. I also, you know, think it's real important to acknowledge that both Herman and I met each other in laughter and joy and play. And like, you know, he used to clown me as much as I clowned him. And there was something about being in that man's presence that took you outside of the reality of that prison. You know, and I think that is just testament to his strength. And also because, you know, I believe that, and so did Herman, that this is my life's work. This is what I was supposed to do. Whatever kind of DNA structure, you know, has been gifted to me is that for me to go into chaos, I can remain calm. But like you know, you fuck with my dog and I'll lose it. Like I just like things that might feel like small to someone else, for me are, you know, like overwhelming, but I can go into the center of Angola and hold space and really feel protected. And then also, you know, if it is TMI, I have like a very, very incredible support network of beloved folks, both formerly incarcerated and never incarcerated, who really, you know, pick me up when I can't keep going. And I'm a very spiritual person. And, you know, I've studied Mahayana Buddhism for 15 years. And, you know, it is something that has offered me access to a life of selfless service, which is exactly the same principles and teachings of the Black Panther Party for self-defense, to ensure that all folks have equal access to land, bread, water, housing, education, healthcare, control of technology, an end to police brutality, and end to all forms of oppression, right? That you do this, your life is only meaningful when it is dedicated to the service of others. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. And so for everybody out there, we have about 5 more minutes. So if anybody from the audience has questions, please use the question function and I can see it. And I'm wondering if Justin has any questions as well. So I don't want you to leave. I know, Justin, if you have any, you know, chime in. So let me see here. We have a question from Melissa. It says, first of all, this is beyond. So I would agree. Yes. As one Black judge of a woefully tiny number of Black judges in Rhode Island who is actively working to reform the system from within, I needed this, but more importantly, my colleagues need this. Yes, I would agree. As someone who studies judges and prosecutors, et cetera, you know, I'm going to go to Sherrill on this kind of statement. Can you talk about you know, how judges, prosecutors, officials, all those that you'd encountered on your journey to exonerate yourself and be, you know, show your innocence, how does that inspire your worldview?
In the beginning, I felt at a real disadvantage by my education or lack thereof education of the justice system. It seemed like soon as I turned myself in for the warrant that was out for my arrest, it was just over after that. The experience was very like dramatic. It really was forfeiting myself to kind of be handled and misused in that way. But as far as like the relationships of the trials and my relationships to the many lawyers that I've encountered just in this one thing, it's not that hard to notice that it's a very business-driven financial type of situation. From court-appointed lawyers that I had who were just overworked, and time is of value in ways of that they have none. So therefore, there's not much value on my case. And it's no fault to their position. I know, many public defenders. I don't know them personally, but I know public defenders around the country in some states like Louisiana and things of that nature, in some places like are just overly, worked for sure. And then there's like different levels of single practitioners and firms. And the same judge that I had in my first trial was the same judge that sat on my retrial, which ultimately never happened because the other side just forfeited and I won that. But she also sat on my exoneration trial and literally said like, oh, I remember you saying you didn't do this, like, and so like, as I begin to kind of look at these positions, and the idea is for them to be unbiased and not human and objective, but that's impossible the way I feel. Like somebody could have really stepped on this lady's toes before she got to see me and the 40 other individuals that were on her docket or her list that day, that morning. And can really affect moods. It's just like they are not impenetrable, if you can say that, like, and that's how mistakes happen. That's how misjudging of character happens. Time is, again, the amount of time we spend to really understand what cases we have and things of that nature and all of that. But yeah, more so like I have friends who are lawyers and they talk about this position of being unbiased. And it's a very tough thing because, we all on this panel can be unbiased, but we all were raised and, we grew up differently. We all have different ways. I've heard judges of holding their courtroom to their ways. Like nobody can, as a judge, I've heard judges like, you can't come in here if you don't have a tie or a shirt on. And that really affects the rest of their life, like, and so, yeah, I don't know if that answers it, but I have.
Thank you. I should probably, I said so casually, Melissa, I probably should have said Judge DuBose. So I apologize on that. I think you're spot on. Again, I do research in this area and we saw it in the Rittenhouse case. Like, I wish that every judge would assume innocence to, Black youth as they did for Kyle Rittenhouse, as he just needed some tears to manufacture some tears. And, and yet you see a stream of mostly Black defendants and Latinx defendants coming through these courts and not afforded the humanity, like we were saying with, and, for Ricardo, the idea too, like when people are unkempt, they're presented that way in front of the judge, and it matters. Absolutely. I'd love to, because we're running out of time, but I would love to maybe end by just asking each one of you, and we'll start with Ricardo. When you think of resistance to mass incarceration, what do you feel most proud of in your work? What motivates you to keep going?
Well, personally, I feel that my work. I'm an artist that I think is. I'm doing a lot of different things, and I sometimes can beat myself up for not focusing on the activist side of it. I'm doing other things, and really, it's just reckoning with the balance that I can find in not burning. I mean, I applaud people that are, Jackie, spending 20 years on incarceration focus. It's incredible. I am not that type of artist, and I still want to leave space for people that can dip in and out of that kind of thing. To basically, I feel that we are all translating different parts of this system and translating it for people who didn't get access to that. And yeah, I'm going to be continuing doing different parts of this system, whether it's in drug policy, which is kind of what I've been focusing on lately, sex work, everything related to incarceration. But I just am inspired really by seeing all these different types of work and the levels that people have gone into addressing these issues.
Awesome. And then Sherrill?
Yeah, I piggyback on that, what Ricardo said as well. I guess, with me, I was kind of thrown in it. I didn't really want to do it per se, but even coming out, I've had, many family members who have been incarcerated and things of that nature. And then it became a part of my life directly. Me, when I entered into the jail that I was in, it forced me to recognize my own prejudice. Like when I was next to some of the other men that I shared space with. And that's kind of what's kind of happening in my work in most ways, of just kind of like repurposing the exercises that I did personally to kind of like put people through it through the artwork, to kind of change perspective of what it really is. Like, once I got access in, it completely changed the way I saw it and experienced it. And then coming back out completely changed how I saw the world. So in that way, that's me. I feel lucky. And then I guess there's like a responsibility for surviving, because like you had alluded to earlier, like there's a lot of people who don't get to have the same outcome that I did. And then with me specifically, I had an outlet after the outcome through art to kind of express, communicate all of these things. So I really want to do that as like, whether it be an avatar or just like exposing things that, that I wouldn't wish anybody else to have to go through this, to do this, but in a way, knowing what happens on the inside is a better education. Learning from people who are close to it and stories from people who have lived it also is like a good education for those of what we're led to believe out here, or what I was led to believe before it actually happened to me as well.
Thank you so much. And then Jackie.
I'm going to need the question again, but I do also want to comment a little bit to the judge and dovetail off what Sherrill said, is because I really hate daylight savings. Like I find it just like messes with my body so hard. And there was a recent study that came out, I don't know if y'all heard this, where it's like the conviction rate of judges in the wake of daylight savings goes up astronomically because they're not sleeping as much. Isn't that crazy? And so obvious, right? Is like this, the issue is not so much.
In my study, actually, I had a judge that fell asleep on the bench during a trial.
Yeah,
I'm not kidding. Turned their back, and and we had multiple court watchers watching as the judge slept.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine
it's obvious that it's
to your
system,
point,
right? Yeah, exactly. And that, so long as we are not identifying the humanity of who we are and all the ways we make mistakes, and that, abolition for me does not require innocence, doesn't require innocence to love on someone. Like it really requires you being able to see the complexity of who they are. They could have caused great, great harm and still be an amazing dad, brother, sister, auntie, friend, homie, comrade. You know what I mean? Like we're all built like that, including these judges, right? And so the system itself doesn't allow for those kinds of complexities in all of the different ways that we are accessing and employing it. And, for me, that becomes the argument of why we must abolish the entire thing. That last slide with Buckminster Fuller, you have to, to create a new system, you must live or exist outside the existing system, right? You must create something absolutely new in order to change something. And I do believe that is true for the PIC as well. Yeah,
that's amazing. Thank you. And I want to say, because we ran out of time, and Justin, will you please take us out and with a final note and goodbye?
Thank you so much, Jackie, Sherrill, Ricardo, Professor Van Cleave, for speaking with us today. This was so amazing. I honestly think this was the highlight of my November so far. Amazing. And thank you so much to our attendees. I'm so glad you guys were able to make it. I hope you had a wonderful time and learned a lot about how art can be wielded as a tool to combat mass incarceration. And thank you again to our panelists. I hope you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving week. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you and good night.
Bye. Thank you, guys.